The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, later this year, American citizens across the country will exercise one of their most valuable and sacred rights, the right to vote. A right that has been hard-earned and fought for from the founding generation of our republic to today. And how was the right to self-government, the right to vote, secured? It was secured by American colonists who rejected the royal edict and hurled tea into Boston Harbor, declaring no taxation without representation. It was secured by ordinary men who seized their muskets and fired the shot heard round the world at Lexington and Concord. It was secured by continental troops who marched to the fields of Saratoga and the coastline of Yorktown, repeating those immortal words of Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death." For nearly 250 years, Americans have cast their votes for leaders at every level, from local officials to state representatives to the President of the United States. Every member of this body is here today because we were elected fairly and honestly and given a mandate by our constituents to serve them here in Washington and to protect the liberties and freedoms our founders fought to preserve. The power of the ballot box determines the course of our nation, the history we are writing, and the freedoms that we continue to defend. And while no single ballot in isolation may seem decisive, together, the votes of the American people shape the course of our nation and the course of history. But it is worth remembering that our voting system did not begin as it exists today. When this nation was founded, the right to vote was limited, and over time, through debate, sacrifice, a bloody civil war, and constitutional amendment, the right to vote was quite properly expanded. The 15th Amendment prohibited denying the vote based on race. The 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. At every stage of our constitutional amendment process, the goal was the same: to ensure that the right to vote belonged to American citizens and that it was exercised with integrity. And while our system has evolved, one principle has remained constant. Elections reflect the will of the American people. For a right so sacred, for a privilege so hard fought, it is shocking, it is tragic, how neglected and vulnerable the protection of our elections has become. That is why I'm here today on this very floor, urging the members of this body to pass the Save America Act. It says that when you register to vote in a federal election, you must provide proof that you are a citizen of the United States, and you must provide photo ID to vote. In simple terms, that's it. This is not some radical, politicized, or weaponized piece of legislation designed to restrict Americans from voting. It is a common sense measure that protects the integrity of our elections by ensuring that American citizens and only American citizens are voting in them. Legitimacy in a democracy rests on two pillars. First, the mechanical integrity of the system to produce a valid result, and second, the public's confidence in that system. If either one fails, the system falters. If both fail, the system collapses. A system that cannot be trusted is a system that cannot govern. If you look around the world, between 2/3 and 3/4 of countries require some form of identification to vote. Why? Because it safeguards the integrity of their elections and reinforces public trust in their system. So it begs the question, why hasn't the United States fully embrace this standard? Well, for the last several months, we have heard claim after claim about how this legislation would somehow inhibit people from voting, that requiring identification is discriminatory, that the American people do not support voter ID. Mr. President, our Democrat colleagues are fond of bellowing into the TV cameras that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow. They tell us with mock earnestness. Now, I will admit, our Democrat colleagues should be experts in Jim Crow, because it was Democrat politicians who passed the Jim Crow laws. It was Democrat politicians who founded the Ku Klux Klan. It was Democrat politicians for decade after decade who enforced discrimination, separate but equal, poll taxes, and a host of other laws designed to prevent African Americans from voting. But do you know who has rejected their disingenuous claim that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow? The Supreme Court of the United States. Supreme Court of the United States, the state of Indiana, passed photo ID law requiring that you show a photo ID to vote. And a group of left-wing plaintiffs filed litigation challenging that. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. At the time, I was the Solicitor General of the state of Texas. I led a coalition of states before the Supreme Court defending photo ID to vote. And the left-wing plaintiffs made the same argument that our Democrat colleagues make today, that requiring photo ID to vote would somehow disenfranchise minorities. The Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, rejected their argument. The author of the majority opinion was John Paul Stevens. John Paul Stevens was one of the great liberals on the court. He was not a conservative. He was not on the right wing. He was the leading liberal for years on the U.S. Supreme Court. He rejected that claim, and he pointed out that when someone votes illegally, they are stealing the votes of legal voters. They are stealing the votes of American citizens. The Supreme Court explained that when photo ID laws have been implemented, minority participation in the election goes up, not down. And the Supreme Court explained that requiring photo ID enhances the integrity of an election and the integrity of democracy. Now, our Democrat colleagues don't want to acknowledge any of those facts. And I guess it's understandable, because the American people have heard their specious arguments and they have rejected them. Mr. President, 81% of Americans support requiring photo ID to vote. But my Democrat colleagues might say, what about African Americans? Well, about 3/4 of African Americans in the United States support requiring photo ID to vote. How about Hispanics? More than 80% of Hispanics in America support requiring photo ID to vote. How about Democrats? Here's an astonishing statistic. If you get out of elected office, if you ask a Democrat on the street, 70% of Democrats in America support requiring photo ID to vote. The one group that doesn't are elected Democrats in the United States Senate and the United States House. And by the way, the premise of their argument that minorities, if you require photo ID to vote, are not going to be able to vote is frankly insulting. Mr. President, I'm proud to be an Hispanic American. I've been an Hispanic all my life. You know what I've got in my wallet? I have a driver's license. I look at my colleagues across the way. I feel confident they have driver's licenses in their wallets as well. Hispanics are not morons. African Americans are not morons. And when you claim minorities can't figure out how to get a driver's license, well, gosh, what do you need a photo ID to vote to do right now in America? You need a photo ID to purchase alcohol or to purchase tobacco. You need a photo ID to gamble or purchase lottery tickets. You need a photo ID to go into a bar. You need a photo ID to get on a plane. You need a photo ID to rent a car. You need a photo ID just to drive a car, not even rent a car, drive a car. You need a photo ID to apply for government benefits. You need a photo ID to enroll in college. You need a photo ID to open a bank account. You need a photo ID to check into a hotel. And I got to admit, this is my personal favorite. You need a photo ID, actually 2 photo IDs, to shovel snow in New York City. These are routine, everyday activities. The gallery is full. I feel confident everyone in the gallery who is not a child has a driver's license. And by the way, you wouldn't be admitted to the gallery if you didn't. And I feel confident every member of this chamber has done just about anything I listed well, except shoveling snow. I'm not convinced many of my colleagues have shoveled snow. Oh, they do shovel other things. The question is not whether Americans are bright enough to obtain photo ID. We know they can, and we know they do. The real question is, why would we not require the same level of verification for something as consequential and vital as voting? Are our Democrat colleagues saying voting doesn't matter? Or is it something else? Voting is not just another everyday activity. It rolls around every year, a few years, and it is the vehicle that protects the principles of our republic and safeguarding what matters. This legislation is necessary because there are individuals and systems that can undermine confidence in our elections if proper safeguards are not in place. And one of the most apparent ways that we've seen is through the masses of illegal immigrants that our Democrat colleagues let in through open borders over 4 years. During the Biden administration, more than 12 million illegal immigrants flooded into this country, the vast majority through my home state of Texas. Now, Mr. President, understand that was not an accident. That was not something the Democrats could not stop. That was their desired outcome. How do we know that? Because the instant President Trump was sworn into office for his second term, illegal border crossings plummeted 99%. Overnight. The Democrats said, no, Joe Biden can't secure the border. He needs new legislation. We now know that was a lie. It was objectively false, and they knew it was false. Well, if they could have secured the border for 4 years, and they chose not to, they chose to let murderers into this country. They chose to let rapists into this country. They chose to let child molesters into this country. They chose to let gangbangers into this country. They chose to let terrorists into this country. We've had 4 radical Islamic terror attacks in the last 2 weeks. Why, Mr. President, would the Democrats choose to allow more than 12 million illegal aliens to invade this country? And I'm going to suggest the obvious reason. Because the Democrats look at those illegal aliens and they want them to cast vote for Democrats in federal elections. Why are the Democrats lined up and say, no, 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 under no circumstances should we test to see if you're an American citizen. Under no circumstances should we require photo IDs. You know, there was one activist a few years ago who filmed himself going into a D.C. polling place. D.C. polling place said, sir, what's your name? And he said, my name is Eric Holder. Now, this activist was not the Attorney General of the United States at the time. But yet D.C. handed him a ballot and said, Mr. Holder, please cast your vote. The Democrats are lined up in this chamber because they want our elections to be insecure. They want voter fraud to be rampant and to be easy. Ask yourself, do the American people have a difficult time buying a beer? Do they have a difficult time getting into an R-rated movie? Do they have a difficult time getting on an airplane? Well, yes, because the Democrats have refused to fund the TSA, and so there are long lines right now. But the lack of a photo ID is not an impediment that stops people from flying. This debate is about something very simple. Do our elections matter? Does our democracy matter? And boy, Mr. President, I got to say, that is a phrase the Democrats love, that they are defending democracy. It's interesting, their voice usually drops an octave when they say that. They clutch their pearls. And that's just the men. Defending democracy is what they say. Ask yourself, why are they not concerned at all about 12 million illegals who they let into this country voting illegally? I'll submit, Occam's razor provides the simplest solution is usually the right one. The simplest solution is very clear. The Democrats in this body want illegals to vote for. They want power enough that they are more than happy to undermine democracy, to try to seize power. I get that from their personal self-interest, but it is not in the interest of the men and women they represent. It is not in the interest of the people of America. This bill is rightly called the Save America Act. And Mr. President, if we were voting on the merits of what was good for America, what was good for democracy, what was good for American citizens, although I would note on the other side of this building at the State of the Union address that you were at, that I was at, we saw why our Democrat colleagues are so adamantly opposed to this bill. President Trump turned to the Democrats on the right side of the floor of the House, and it gave them an opportunity to demonstrate with absolute clarity. He said, if you agree, our first priority should be to fight for American citizens and not for illegal aliens, please stand. And every single Democrat in Congress remained seated. Not a one of them. I would note, as we're on the floor today, of the 47 Democrats in this body, only one is here on the floor. But a whole lot more were on the floor during the State of the Union. Every one of them chose to remain seated because they could not support the statement that we need to support American citizens and not illegal aliens. That's why they oppose the Save America Act, because they want to be handed power over this country by the illegal aliens they let into this country. That's why we need to save America. And it's why I urge every member of this body to pass the Save America Act. I yield the floor.